by myself, just head down, my arms resting on the top of the crutches, giving myself this break. But at the same time, I'm like literally just bawling my eyes out because I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to walk normal again. And that was one of the moments where it was really dark for me because you never realize something until it's gone. And I've experienced that a couple of times in my life. That was one of them, and the passing of my dad was another. But those two things, it's just like the emotions, the overwhelming emotions that you feel, it's like none other. And that's like the lowest of the low I think I can ever remember, is just sitting there thinking I'm never going to be able to walk normal again.
That is Seth Rose this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. What's up, everybody? How's it going? How are you? How's your training going? Have you gotten outside? I have actually had the opportunity to ride my bike outside the last 2 days in a row, which was absolutely fantastic. The weather here on the East Coast is finally starting to take a turn for the better. It is not cold. I always hate that time. Well, now, more recently, I hate that time between when ski season ends and then you can get outside for something a little bit more fun like riding your bike. But it's finally here. I've had a chance to get out there and I am absolutely loving it. And I hope you are getting a chance to enjoy it as well. This week, my guest is Seth Rose, and I got connected with Seth thanks to a previous podcast guest, Mr. Justin Mendoza, 2-time appearance here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, and he got me connected with Seth, and he was like, look, Seth is amazing. You got to get him on the show. So I reached out. I said, hey, Seth, what's going on? Justin sent me over, and the rest was history. So Seth is a mental performance consultant. So he helps players and teams with their mental performance, specifically when it comes into like preparation for big events or games. And I mean, Seth is no slouch himself. He is a competitive half Ironman distance triathlete along with an competitive Olympic distance triathlete, and so he has really had an opportunity to kind of put some of these practices to the test on himself, and so I'm sure that has really come into play with when it comes to coaching and consulting with these teams, because obviously they want to see results. So without much further ado, I would like to get into this week's episode with Seth, and I hope you enjoy.
Good?
Yeah, man. We're good?
Cool.
So, Seth, I just want to say thank you so much for being open to this idea. I know that we got connected through a mutual friend that we have, Mr. Justin Mendoza, and Justin has always sent me some top-notch guests and put me in contact with some very top-notch people. So not to put any pressure on you, but I'm sure that this conversation is going to be nothing short of that. And, it's going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it, especially as I was kind of like, going over my notes and going over your story and everything and some of the stuff that you had shared with me. So I'm looking forward to it. And I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on. I really appreciate it. And, it just kind of worked out. Yeah, I know that you're on spring break, so things work out this way. And even with the time difference, things are going to be just great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Justin Mendoza, he's a top-notch guy, so it makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because one of the other guys that I had on, Brandon Kraut, he has never met Justin, which I have never met Justin. I don't know if you met Justin. I think he's from that SoCal area, so wouldn't surprise me if you guys knew each other. But yeah, it was funny. Him and I, Justin and I, have never met, and Brandon Kraut and Justin had never met, so we're both like, well, I didn't turn the video on when I did Justin's podcast, and Brandon's like, well, I've never met him either, and we're like, well, how do we actually know that he is who he says he is?
Yeah, no, me and Justin go way back. I actually went to high school with him in Northern California, believe it or not. So I've been living in Southern California for almost 5 years now. But yeah, growing up, I knew Justin. I know his mom really well. His little brother went to high school with my little brother. And I knew him way back before he even started with triathlon. I actually was at his first triathlon race, one of the local races in Northern California. So it's really cool to see Justin to grow from where he was during his motocross days to now where he's at, moving to Colorado with his wife and the journey that he's on to becoming a pro triathlete. He's the definition of determined and humble as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Very, very humble guy, and actually, his episode on this podcast was very, very early on. So, if you are coming over to the podcast because you know Seth and this is your first time here, or if you are one of the newer listeners that we've picked up kind of in the last couple of months here, definitely go back and take a listen to that episode. I don't remember which episode it is off the top of my head, but it's in the very, very early days of the podcast, but it is absolutely worth a listen. Justin is a great guy.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was looking back, this may or may not help. I want to say it was like your second or third, but then it looks like you had another reiteration of it, or you interviewed him again.
Yeah, so we did that first episode. So that's what I was going to say too. I think it was episode 2 where we did a deep dive into his story and the motocross days that you just referenced there, and then how he got into triathlon through his rehab process and everything. So yeah, episode 2 sounds about right for his actual background story, and then with such a heavy focus on his season this year and trying to qualify for his pro card, I had him back on again so that we could kind of break down how the season went. And how he felt he was progressing towards his goals. So that's what we did there.
Nice. Yeah, I'd have to take a listen to that one. I haven't listened to the second one, but I can only imagine it's as golden as the first one.
Yeah. They were both, like I said, they were both great. So now I know that we're gonna take a deep dive into your story as well. You're working as a mental performance consultant right now, and so what is top of mind for you right now? Like, what do you have going on right this minute that you really have your sights set on? As the mental performance consultant and also as the triathlete.
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now, like you had mentioned, I am a mental performance consultant by trade. I have my certification in mental performance consulting. My master's and my graduate training is in sport and performance psychology. And at the moment, I have my own company called Transition Performance, where I specialize in those consulting services for teams and athletes, as well as coaching right now with a local triathlon team out of Long Beach, California. And so I get a lot of face time with athletes, and I coach some master swim workouts every once in a while. And but by no means do I work specifically just with triathletes and endurance athletes. I do have a few, but my athletes and my clientele, if you will, range anywhere from a 10-year-old tennis player up to a 55-year-old mountain bike rider who just wants to compete, in his eyes, compete at the local group rides to get a great workout in. So that's the main focus right now, and I'm actually continuing on to get a doctoral degree, a Ph.D. in sports psychology, coming up in the fall of this year, with the goal in mind of continuing these professional services and educating athletes and teams that there's more to just the physical, technical, and tactical side of sport and performance, and the mental side is always there. And we always say that it's important, but how do we train the mind a little bit more consistently so that way we can perform our best when it matters most? So that's really the main goal and the main focus. To supplement that, I teach at a local university here in Southern California at California State University, Fullerton. And I'm just hired there part-time, and I fill in and I teach some of the upper division undergrad classes that are requirements for the students there. And my class that I teach is the psychology of sport and physical activity. So it's really cool to bring in my applied experiences with the athletes that I work with and my coaching experience, and really try to motivate and get these kids inspired to learn more about the mental side of sport, and translating it and transitioning that into their everyday life as a student, because a lot of these students are working either part-time or full-time. They might have family, friends, or relatives that they have to take care of. And they're performers in their own realm. So they're students. They have to take exams. They have to study for those exams. They have to time manage. They have to do group presentations in front of large classes, which could cause a lot of stress and anxiety for them. They might be going up for big job interviews once they graduate from college. And so the class is a really cool way to teach them the research and the principles behind why the mental training and the mind is so important in those aspects, but also to give them actual tools that they can use in their everyday life, just in case they aren't really interested in being a mental performance consultant. A lot of these students are sport science majors that are more interested in things like physical therapy or occupational therapy or strength and conditioning coaching. And it's so just a way to integrate the mind and bring the importance to it. So I guess that's the one half of the professional side of Seth Rose.
Well, and I was going to say another way that you can probably connect with a lot of these athletes as well is through personal experiences, because I'm sure, as a sub 5-hour half Ironman, you have some of this as well, and you've been through a lot of these different things that some of your athletes are probably trying to work through. So yes, I'm sure that all of your study has really helped you, but I would have to imagine that some of your personal experiences have also really helped you.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess maybe this is kind of a way that I usually start off my semester with these students is getting them to think about their purpose and their why and what really drives them to do what they do. Because they've really probably haven't ever thought about that. And some of them come into college thinking, hey, I just want to get an education because my parents are making me, or hey, I want to get a kinesiology degree so that way I can go on to PT. But then they later find out that physical therapy isn't really their thing, just because everybody else is doing it. And so we really talk about this why, and the way that I explain it to them is, it's easy to say what you do, right? I'm a mental performance consultant, or I'm a triathlete, or I'm a student. But it's very difficult to say why you're doing it. So my why stems from my sport experiences growing up. And I actually, never really dabbled into cycling or running. I've always been a swimmer, so that's always been around in my background. My parents thought it was very important for me to learn how to swim at a young age, which I absolutely agree. Having taught undergrad students at the age of 20 to 30 on how to swim when they've never been in the water before is pretty interesting. But I'm actually started out playing soccer for 18 years. Started off just recreationally, but then once I got into high school, dropped all my other sports. I ran track just to keep in shape for the off season, but I started playing year round. I never actually got on a travel team just because my family, we weren't able to afford it. So I played with my coaches on the off season in a Mexican soccer league in the Central Valley. So I had to drive it was like a Sunday league, and we drove about an hour and 15 minutes one way to get to these soccer fields. And I would play with a bunch of old men who were drinking Coronas and smoking cigarettes at halftime. And I was this short little 18, 17-year-old playing with these grown men. And it really taught me how to play aggressive, and really taught me to continue working on my game. And so, like I mentioned, didn't really have the opportunities to play travel league, and being from a very small town of my town's probably about 3,000, and mine and Justin's graduating class in high school was about 90. So come from a very small town. So to get your name out there for colleges to play was pretty difficult in my mind at the time. And I didn't have the resources readily available to continue on to that next step. And so my senior year, I was like, you know what, I want to play in college, but I don't want to go to junior college. I want to continue with my education. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, at least I can say I tried everything I could. So the school that I had actually applied to and got into was a CSU school in Central California in Turlock. And the school is Cal State University Stanislaus. And so I show up there about a month before August. So this is like sometime in July, and they're getting ready for the next season. And I got invited by the head coach, to come and do a walk-on tryout. And so I was super excited, and I'd done all this work, all the extra training, all the extra workouts, and show up and just get my ass handed to me. I had never really played at that high of a level before. And, the skill and the technical piece that I had, I was a phenomenal ball handler. Not to my own horn, but I was pretty good both left and right side of the field. And just, I wasn't the quickest. And at the college level, that next step, it's just, those guys are, they're lifting weights, 3 times a week. They're doing a lot of sprint training. They have certain mile standards. I think it was like they had to run 2 miles in 12 minutes to even get on the team. And so coming in as a freshman at that time with no real running training or triathlon training, a 12-minute 2-miler to me was like, oh my God, that's really fast. You know what I mean?
That's super fast.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, because, soccer is like obviously all about running. I mean, it's a sport that's completely centered around running, but even still, that's pretty fast. And I actually wanted to ask you a question before we get a little bit too far into your college, like, soccer days. When you were making your decisions about where to go for college, going back to what you were saying about your students and how you start your semester and asking about your why, were you looking at particular colleges based on, what major you were going for? Were you even considering what major you were going for? Or was your goal at that point in time in your life just to play soccer?
Yeah, soccer was life, man. That was it.
And so you had no considerations about like life after college and life after soccer, and what you wanted to do, what you wanted to major in, or anything like that?
Absolutely not. I originally wanted to be an architectural designer.
Okay.
And when I found out that I got into Stanislaus, and then I went to go try out, I was doing a lot of. Then I did it backwards, right? I got into the college, and then I started looking. Okay, what majors do they have? And so many people switch their majors multiple times when they're going through college, and a lot of my students. And I referenced this, like, hey, I wanted to be an architectural designer. And then I finally found, I was kind of interested in psychology a little bit, and I knew that the brain was really intriguing for me. So I started taking some intro to psych classes when I started going to Stanislaus. But I think to answer your question, the turn where it happened was, if we go back to this soccer tryout. So I absolutely, like I mentioned, I got destroyed that day, and the coach said, hey, look, you have the technical skills, it's just you need to work on some strengthening and speed work. You can come back next spring after our season and continue training with us, and you can walk on basically as as a red shirt. And I was like, okay, cool. So in that time, I'm playing intramural soccer to stay in shape and to keep my technical side down, while at the same time I'm training a lot, doing more running and doing more lifting. And one night I was studying for midterms, and we had an intramural game that I was going to skip. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my fiance, she was like, hey, let's go to the game. And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay in today. I've got to study. We got this midterm tomorrow. And she said, nah, it's okay. You need a break. And so it's like, fine. So we get there, and it was a really rough game. And I ended up having a pretty gruesome, significant injury. I had a full knee dislocation during the game, and I ended up rupturing almost every ligament in my knee. I tore part of my hamstring, had significant nerve damage, and they actually had to ambulance me to the local hospital. And this is at like 9:30 at night, because my knee was still dislocated. It basically just popped out and it just stayed there. So I was in excruciating pain. And yeah, so we did the whole knee injury process. And during that time, there was a lot of emotional highs and lows, more lows than highs actually. And I really started questioning, like, what am I doing? Like, my identity was a soccer player as an athlete, and now I'm a nobody. And knowing now in the field of sports psychology, it's a typical thing for injured athletes to go through these anxiety spells, and the depression, and the 5 stages of grief. And I started questioning my identity, because day in and day out, like I said, soccer was life, and now it was gone. It was taken away from me, and doctors were telling me that I was never going to be able to really run to my full potential again. They said I'd be able to jog here and there, but it wouldn't really be something that I could continue long term. They mentioned that I might have significant cartilage damage and deterioration throughout the years, and I might have to have multiple knee surgeries closer to the age of 30s and 40s. And so it was pretty dark, man. I went through, like, honestly, it was fucked up. It was really bad.
And so this was a career-ending injury. Like, you knew at that point, unfortunately, and you hadn't even actually played for your college yet, you knew that you were not going to step on the field as a collegiate soccer player like you wanted to.
Yeah, I think part of me thought that, and then part of me thought, like, had that inner fire to continue. But I didn't have the resources, man. If it wasn't for my family and my friends, it would have been a really different story. I used to live on the 3rd story of the dorms, and the elevator was quite a ways away from my room, and there was a set of stairs actually right next to my room door. And so I would challenge myself every day with this full lockout knee brace and crutches to make it literally one step at a time up the stairs all the way to the 3rd story. And I would be literally sweating my ass off. I would carry a towel with me because I'm a heavy sweater. And I would carry a towel with me to crutch to class, because by the time I'd get to class, I'm just drenched in sweat. And it was dark.
Now, as the mental performance consultant that you are, like, looking back, where do you think that came from? Like, was it like a competitive side, like you just wanted to get up and down the steps, or was it like you were going stir crazy, or was it a little mixture of both? Like,
yeah.
Have you ever tried to analyze that point?
I have, actually, and I've done a lot of reflection on it, and this is kind of where my conversation with my students at Fullerton starts, with the passion and the knowing your why. I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I was cooped up inside a lot because I couldn't really, I couldn't walk, I couldn't bend my knee. And so I started really thinking, like, okay, what do I want to do with this psychology degree? And at the time, I've always been around sport and loved athletics, and I've played basketball growing up for a long time. So I'm not just fixated just on soccer, just athletics, and everything runs in my veins, I guess you can say. And then my girlfriend at the time, like I mentioned, my fiance, she was on the college basketball team, so we were always going to all the team sport games on campus. But in my dorm room, I started going online and taking these online quizzes. Like, okay, this is when I started having these freak out moments. Like, what am I going to do with this psychology degree? Like, what the hell? What the hell am I going to start? I have to look at the next step because soccer is, the chances are slim. And so I started taking these online quizzes, and it would always pop up sports psychology major because of my interest in athletics and my competitiveness and my interest in the mind. But then I would look at the average salary, like at the bottom of these little things, and it would tell you kind of like what the average salary of what these people make. And I would see that number and I just laugh. Like, there's no freaking way that I'm going to be doing that for the rest of my life. Like, they don't get, from what this website was paying, they don't get paid shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was constantly battling, and, and so after doing all these searches, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to see what it's like. And I went in, I talked to a counselor at Stanislaus and started taking some kinesiology classes, some sports studies, and all while, you had mentioned if it was me going stir crazy or my competitiveness. I think it was a combination of all these different emotions that an athlete faces when they go through an injury, because there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of worry about the future, like what's next, what's to come. And I was literally a textbook definition of that athlete. Confused, dazed, denial, figuring out what's next, if I'm going to play soccer again, or if I'm going to focus on academics and life and getting a job after college, because all in all, that's what I really came here to do. So, and when I'm telling my students this at Cal State Fullerton, they really connect, because I always tell them, like, I went from wanting to be a architectural designer to showing up and just going through the motions and being a psych major, and then having this like pivotal moment in my life where all of a sudden it was these two worlds of sport and psychology combined. And that's when I started studying sports psychology and really figuring out, like, using myself as a case study almost to help the athletes and to teach them. Because at the time I didn't have the resources, and a lot of colleges at that time were very slow at getting a sports psych consultant or a mental performance consultant on campus to work with your teams, because back in the day, mental performance consulting and sports psych used to be considered a bad thing. It was a big stigma upon professional teams and athletes, like, oh, you're working with Seth, oh, you must be messed up, man, or you must have a problem. But that culture is actually shifting a lot.
And I think that's like really common, even with anything around mental health. And I know that there's people who are working just tirelessly right now to end the stigma that is surrounded, with mental health and mental health issues, and things just all over the gamut, from depression and anxiety, and a lot of these things that could come about from especially something like a situation that you went through. And you mentioned it there earlier, but I want you to touch on, like maybe one to two situations that you can really, really remember just before this pivotal moment that you're talking about, that were really dark for you, and, what was happening, and how did you work through those pivotal times to kind of lead you to this career?
Yeah, that's a deep question. And I think the very first thing that comes to mind is, like I was mentioning, being on the third story of these dorms. I remember one time, like maybe the second or third time that I'm climbing these stairs one by one, and I just like broke down and started crying by myself, just head down, my arms resting on the top of the crutches, giving myself this break. But at the same time, I'm like literally just bawling my eyes out, because I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to walk normal again. And that was one of the moments where it was really dark for me, because you never realize something until it's gone. And I've experienced that a couple of times in my life. That was one of them, and the passing of my dad was another. But those two things, it's just like the emotions, the overwhelming emotions that you feel, it's like none other. And that's like the lowest of the low I think I can ever remember, is just sitting there thinking I'm never going to be able to walk normal again.
And so you made this transition, and you were able to kind of get back and start walking again. And you you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, because you said that you have always been a swimmer. And then obviously you were running from soccer, and you had to do these timed 2-mile runs. But where does the cycling come in? Did you cycle at all while you were going through your rehab for your knee?
Yeah, so that's a common way to start out the rehab process for a knee injury.
Yep.
They put you on the stationary bike, and they have the seat up super high with no resistance, and then as they're working on range of motion, they lower that seat down and start breaking things down, and the pain settles in. So that was really the only cycling that I ever did, was the first stint of rehab at the PT clinic. And then while I was doing this rehab, one of my classmates was an older gentleman by the name of Ed Battisforth, and he at that time was just taking this communications class with me and my roommates because he was about to graduate. And come to find out, this guy is one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life. He was living off campus, so he would come and crash in our dorms in between classes, and he'd always bring in a whole bag of Chipotle and be like, "All right, guys, like, hey, I just want to make sure that you guys know that I'm not using you. Here's lunch on me." And he would always bring in four burritos from Chipotle for us every Tuesday and Thursday that he had to come to campus. The dude was amazing. So he's super into bikes, and like very much into bikes. He ends up graduating and then goes partnership and buys one of the top bike shops in Northern California that next year. So before he buys this bike shop, he starts saying, "Hey, like, if you want to get into cycling, I think it would help you out a lot." And I was like, "Yeah, I think it will. Like, and it's going to help my knee. I'm not going to have to run as much. The doctor said that I should be cautious about running too often to prevent any sort of secondary surgeries down the line." And so I was like, "Okay, I'm going to get a bike." And so I get the bike, and it's actually a 1972 Schwinn Varsity steel frame that my fiance's mom rode in high school. So it's way too big for me, and it weighs about 45 pounds, and I start riding that thing everywhere. I was riding it to class. I hooked up with the local fixie group guys, and we would go like mobbing down the city streets, and then eventually I started getting into actual cycling, and I never thought I would ever buy spandex and get the whole get up and the leotard suit on, and Turlock, it's country roads, so I'd go out and just ride for miles, and then that's kind of where the cycling started. And triathlon wasn't even in the equation yet.
And so, like, that's what I wanted to go to next, is like, and I mean, I don't know, it's different for everybody. And when I first got this idea, or I guess I should say, like, this thought of, maybe I could, maybe I should try that, or maybe I should do that. I was working at the health club where I still work right now, but I was working there as a lifeguard, and I'd see all these guys coming in, like super fit dudes coming in, jumping in the pool to go and, swim. And I was in the same boat as you. Like, I knew how to swim. I had to swim for the lifeguard tests, so that was like 200 or 300 yards, depending on what certification you were going for. And then obviously you had to go and do all of the water rescues. And I knew how to ride a bike, but I never rode a road bike or anything like that. And obviously I had just gotten into running. So I was kind of, I guess, surrounded by / introduced to this idea because of the environment that I was in. And so how did you even discover this? Because this was, I think you said what? It was like 7 years ago. So triathlon has really had an explosion, I would say, within like the last probably like 4 to 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
which was like right when I was getting into it. But prior to that, like it was only for crazy people, So
Yeah.
how did you get introduced to it?
So one of my good friends, we were taking this class together, and one day I was just like, you know what? I need to prove that I can do something. And this was after the rehab process, and humans thrive on accomplishments, and knowing that now, back then, that was a prime example of that. Like I just wanted to do something to prove to myself that I could actually function again, because my knee had been messed up for so long, and I went through a really lengthy rehab process. And so we signed up for a sprint triathlon, uh, and it's a pretty popular triathlon out of Sacramento, California. It's called the Golden State Tri or something like that. And we signed up for the sprint, and we just wanted to complete it. And so I started training. I was swimming as part of my rehab, and then I was actually taking a swim class in college. And so I was getting like a little bit more pool time during this time. Before that, like you mentioned, and like I've mentioned before, I have the background in running, and then the cycling piece. So it made sense. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. Classic first time triathlete, getting there, not knowing what to do, how to set up transition. Didn't do my homework before, and I did it on this Schwinn varsity, right? And so I get to transition, and I'm setting everything up, and this guy next to me is like, dude, is that a Schwinn varsity? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, hell yeah, I had one of those in junior high. And he gave me a high five, and he's got this like Cervelo P3 or something like that. Setting up his aero helmet, and I get all the anxiety, like looking around of all these guys with the fancy equipment, and I'm on this bright yellow Schwinn varsity, and a lot of fun. It was so much fun. Because of the swimming background, I came out of the water pretty high up there, and got just passed like crazy on the bike, and then hung on for the run, and ended up getting a podium in my age group on my first race.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you checked your results and stayed around for your podium, because as I'm sure many of the listeners of this podcast have heard, I had a very, very similar situation to yours. And I show up, same thing, complete newbie, but just out there to have fun, just wanted to complete the race. Go through decent swim, half decent bike, and just hang on for the run, and ended up finishing it fifth in my age group, and didn't realize that their podiums go 5 deep. I thought it was only 3 deep. And so I was walking to my car as they were calling the awards for the age group, and like I could hear my name on the PA system, but I was so far away that they were, like 3 age groups up by the time I got back over there. And I was like, I heard my name called, like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, congratulations, and they give you, because you get your age group place medal. So I'm hoping you actually stayed around and you were there for that picture moment post race.
Yeah, no, I was lucky enough to have my family there, and one of my friends who did it with me, he smashed his age group, and so he was sticking around anyways. And then that's when I found out, like, oh, I made the podium. This is awesome. And then after that, I was hooked. And that's another kind of why I do what I do when I talk to my students in class, and how I relate to some of my athletes that I work with in mental performance is, even if you've never done anything before, like sometimes you just have to try it out, and you never know if it's going to stick. And then that's when I really started diving into more of the sports psych, started taking the classes on campus at school in the kinesiology realm, and intro to sports psychology classes. And like I said, doing a lot of reflection as to like, okay, this is how I'm coping. I'm coping by finding a new sport and finding something that I can be decent at, and maybe draw back on that athlete identity a little bit, and it really helped me after the initial physical therapy rehab process.
And that was all this came post your first triathlon is when you really, really started to dive into this.
Yes, yeah. So like I had mentioned before, I would always, I think maybe like once every couple of weeks, go online and take those little online quizzes on what to do with my psych degree.
Right.
And then after that race, I was like, okay, I'm hooked. I want to do more races. I want to start training properly for these things. And then during taking these classes, I started taking like the ex-phys classes and the biomechanics classes, and then plus the triathlon. We know it's natural cross training. So if I go for a hard ride or a hard run and my knee starts to bother me, well, guess what? I can go and do a recovery day the next day, or go do a harder swim workout. And so I think just based off of the injury, now it's like the training, it just makes sense for long-term knee health.
Yeah. And so like back when you were playing soccer, you didn't have access to any of this.
Not at all. No.
Like none of the sports psychology, you didn't have access to, like there was no like Seth for you when you were growing up.
Not at all. And that's a big reason why I do what I do now, is because using myself, like I mentioned, as a case study, I want to be that person to help these athletes, and even the athletes that I work with now at the Division I level, a lot of them are like, whoa, we have somebody like you? This is awesome. So yeah.
And so, talking about those athletes and talking about some of the people that you work with and everything, what do you think are the top, like, 1 to maybe 3 misconceptions about mental performance, and also like training for mental performance?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing that is still around, but we're trying to clear it up and educate people, is that when we say sports psychology, we immediately mean something clinical, like a clinical disorder, like anxiety, depression, or eating disorders. That can be a part of it. And when you get to, in my field, when you get to the nitty gritty of it, there's really 2 sides of the spectrum. There's the clinical side of sports psychology and mental performance, where they very much so focus on diving into to what's going on there and seeing how that's affecting your performance as an athlete. But then there's also this other side of the spectrum where we call it the like performance optimization or peak performance training. And that's where my training kind of gravitated towards, just because I'm an athlete at heart, I'm competitive, and I want to make sure that I'm getting people to be 1% better every single day. So it's kind of ironic that I got interested in sports psych from this opposite side of the spectrum. But then my graduate training and my experiences, I naturally gravitated back towards the other side, and really help athletes become better every single day. Not saying that the clinical side stuff isn't important, because if it's there, then we'd actually definitely have to address it. But yeah, I would say that's kind of where I work more with my athletes and teams with, is the peak performance training.
And so when it comes to peak performance and it comes to training that kind of stuff, what do people kind of just brush off that maybe they shouldn't? And when it comes to performing at a top level, or even maybe, let's not even say performing at a top level, but let's say performing at your own personal top level, like being the best that you can be, like what do you think that people brush off on the mental side of things?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the times you see people saying that they don't have time to train it. I guess would be one of them, especially at the student athlete, like intercollegiate level. They're so busy all the time anyways. And then also if you're looking at amateur triathletes that have 40-hour week jobs, and then they're still trying to fit in their training, Sometimes they say, well, I don't have time to meet with somebody, or I don't have time to do any sort of these exercises on the mental training side, like visualization or imagery, or practicing my self-talk, or writing down post-training reflections, stuff like that. So that's one of the big ones, is just they feel like they have this it's like a perceived lack of time almost. Another one is a lot of people want the magic pill. They want something where they can watch a video to motivate them, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're mentally strong, or they're mentally tough, they're resilient. All these buzzwords that you see floating around on articles nowadays about sports psychology. I tell people it's just like your regular training. It's mental conditioning. It's not mental magic, and this stuff isn't going to happen overnight. You don't go to a triathlon race not training for anything because you know that you're not going to perform well.
Right.
So there's a lot of preparation that has to come before you actually see some results, and a lot of people don't like that. They want the quick fix in this day and age where everything's immediate and at our fingertips. It's difficult for them to grasp, and it's difficult for people to trust the process when they're working on something for a couple weeks on how to build confidence or overcome open water swim anxiety. They want something right then and there that they can read, listen to, or see, and then it immediately have some sort of effect on their performance as an athlete. And that the reality is that's a huge myth. That's a huge myth.
Well, and so the other thing that I was going to kind of touch on with that is that even though, to tie it kind of back to, let's say, like diet and exercise. So say you're training for a triathlon, right? And,
Yep.
You are looking to improve your bike split. And so you are looking at the data, you're crunching the numbers, maybe you have a coach who's doing that for you. You're structuring your workouts in a certain way. And then, a lot of people will do periodic testing for the FTP test, or at least, they'll go out and do like benchmark rides, and boom, they can see it. Like that is hard data that they can see in front of them. Or if you're losing weight and, if you are following your macros, or you are eating a certain way, whatever the case may be, and you are stepping on the scale every day, every week, every month, whatever it is, again, hard data, you can see that right in front of you. Correct me if I'm wrong in this assumption, but I would assume that sometimes, as much as you work on it, there probably isn't as much hard data when it comes to improving this mental performance side as there is when you're looking at, a physical performance side.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because those things you can get quantifiable measures, objective measures, like, okay, I'm going to add on another 20 pounds of my squat, and in 2 weeks I'm going to see some improvement, or I'm going to do this 4-week build of trainer intervals, and then I'm going to see my FTP improve a little bit. You're exactly right on that. So on the sports psych side, that's where it's the quote unquote buy-in to athletes and teams and coaches is a little bit less, because some people are very data driven and they don't see the instant results. And so the number one thing that we can see is just the subjective, like, how does the athlete, feel, or how does the athlete, do they feel more confident? Do they have a little bit more, trying to think of the word, do they have a little bit more, like, are they more positive after things that typically would cause them to have negative reactions? Are they able to bounce back from failures quicker? Things like that. So you're really doing this through interviews with the athlete and kind of getting a sense on how things are going with them. And then also too, there's organizations out there that are trying to quantify more and more through research how the mental training works. And that's the approach that I take, is following what we call a research practitioner model. And that's doing the research, like the searching on what actually has been proven through evidence to be effective, whether it's a self-talk intervention or an imagery script or relaxation and meditation tools. to help the athlete. And that's what we go off of, is we go off the data from these research articles to help these athletes. And sometimes it works, and other times it's not as effective because either you're dealing with a different population or a different sport, or you're also dealing with human beings. Coaches love to see wins, and when they don't see any wins, it's very hard for them to buy in. But like I said, that comes with this idea of this stigma and us breaking it down. So there's a lot of professional athletes that are talking more and more about mental conditioning coaches. The MLB is a huge advocate of mental conditioning and mental performance. Every single organization, other than I believe 4 or 5 of them, have a team of like 3 to 5 mental conditioning coaches on staff that work with all their teams. The military is the number one hire of masters trained mental performance consultants, and they work a lot with soldiers and cadets on training them to become better performers in the battlefield. So there are quantifiable measures that we can get, some of the things that I mentioned, but it's about strategically using those things appropriately and making sure that it actually fits the needs of the athlete.
And so now I want to tie this back to the triathlon and leading into that. Have you had the opportunity to really see any of this kind of quantifiable data with some of your athletes in regards to event prep and that lead into, usually that 2 weeks or 1 week out when training starts to drop off, and it seems like that's when shit hits the fan, so to speak, because you aren't focused on training. Like all through that build up to your race, you are thinking about your training, you got your schedule, everything is all planned out. And a lot of us working class triathletes, we have a lot going on. So we don't really have the time or the bandwidth to start concerning ourselves with like, oh, well, what happens if this or that? So have you had the chance to work with anybody and really see an improvement leading into those race week kind of nerves that everybody gets?
Yeah, definitely. And you're exactly right. Kind of when you get to that taper mode, you have a lot more time to think, and that's where those self-doubts start to come up. And I've worked with a beginner triathlete that does a lot of training individually of each sport, but then they've never put everything together. And so it's, hey, when you go and do your final workouts before you switch to taper mode, sometimes it's just the physical preparation that maybe their coach isn't helping them with, to get them to feel a little bit more confident and comfortable when they actually get to race day. So maybe it's wearing their wetsuit on a swim to see what that feels like, and then getting out of the water and pulling that thing off as quick as possible, or maybe it's doing that last final bike ride in your race kit and then going out onto the run. So sometimes it's just physical stuff. But the other stuff would be, okay, let's create a pre-preparation routine, is what we call it in the field of sports psych, and let's figure out what we're going to start thinking about 2 days out before the race, so that way we can occupy ourselves and almost distract the mind and displace these potential negative thoughts of self-doubt and worry, to get ourselves to focus on what I call winning. And so winning, if you spell it out, W-I-N, is win. But if you acronym it, it's what's important now. And so if you focus on the task relevant cues in the moment, where you're in the present moment, where your mind is right over where your feet are, right in the present moment, and do those things to your full potential, then the results will take care of themselves, and we have less room for all these self-doubts. So let me give you a specific example of somebody that I've worked with. This person has really bad open water swim anxiety, and this triathlon that they're about to do is one of their first swims in an open water swim environment. And so we do a lot of preparation on explaining or talking about like what are some of the things outside of our control when it comes to open water swim environments. And so this particular person writes down things like weather conditions, potential wildlife, people around them, or choppy waves. And then we focus on the things that are in our control. Okay, well, what are some things that we can do to minimize sort of the stress that you have going into an open water swim environment? And we think of things like deep breathing. And this particular athlete, we had been practicing some meditation strategies and some deep breathing exercises. And so this person has practiced it, and they know what it takes to do that. So we remind them, okay, we need to do that before the race starts. And then we focus on other things in our control. Well, we can be the last person in the water to get away from everybody, or we can set ourselves up on the far left of the swim start, so that way you're kind of away from people and you can see where everybody else is at. So those sort of things. And then once we focus on things in our control, we have more confidence, because it's the external locus of control things that I mentioned before that really get people stressed out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it happens all the time. And so that's what I was kind of ask you for next is like just any little tips, kind of like some of the ones that you just gave, like if you have anxiety around some open water swim, you just gave some great tips that people could use there. But even some tips for people who they haven't trained their, for mental performance, specifically when you're talking about that race week taper and leading into some of these things. I know that you touched on, WIN and that acronym. But is there anything else that any just little tips that you could offer up to people who haven't done this before, and have some of these anxieties and kind of don't know how to handle them?
Right. Yeah. And I think this might build off of your last question. If I didn't answer it too clear, you were talking about kind of like that taper week, right? And then a lot of, and this goes with anything in life, school, work, triathlon, family, stress. The stress that you feel can potentially decrease confidence in your ability to do something. So like stress at work might decrease your confidence to have present at a work meeting or take an exam or complete your first triathlon race. But to build, I feel like the number one thing to build confidence and to decrease stress is preparation, right? So you're putting in the preparation physically, but then race week, when you have that downtime, or taper week, when you have that downtime, you can prepare what your game plan might be once you get closer to the race. Like, where do you go to transition? Are you looking for the swim exit and the bike exit, and visualizing where you have to run to go find your bike, and then visualizing where you're going to come in from the bike and put your bike back, sort of those things. I think that's a huge piece to getting rid of those negative thoughts during the taper week. Another thing too is sometimes if you don't have access to a mental performance consultant, any coach that you have, USA Triathlon coach, I mean, they have to know some of the mental side of their sport, of triathlon. It's part of the USAT coaching certification if you take it. And so a simple question to your coach, like, hey, what are some things mentally that I can do if you're trying to resource and try to find ways? Other things too is there's a lot of great books out there that can help, a lot of great articles. It's just you have to be wary of information overload. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so actually one of the things that my coach has had me do pretty much for every single taper week, leading into like my A races, he puts it in Training Peaks, but I actually have started doing it even for non-A races, just as kind of a way to prep. And it is the visualization that you were just talking about, but not only visualizing like, okay, there's swim in, there's bike out, there's bike in, there's run out, there's the finish over there, like going through that whole thing. But I also actually visualize and go through my entire day. So, waking up and the alarm going off and prepping my coffee and prepping my breakfast for the day and, putting the peanut butter on the bagel. And like, I just go through, and while I'm going through that, I have positive like self-talk about how I'm going to feel in the water and how I'm going to feel coming out of the water, and glancing down at my watch as I'm hitting lap so that it starts the transition, and looking down, being satisfied with my swim that I just had, and just like visualizing every single step of the race. And it's all surrounded with positive thoughts and like positive self-talk about like you said, having done the work and prepared for the event physically, just using a positive self-talk to know that work has paid off, and it's going to be a great day.
Yeah, I think the imagery and visualization is huge, and that's awesome that your coach is doing that and having you do that, and that you're actually doing it a lot more as well. There is one thing that I do teach all of my athletes when we're doing visualization and imagery is it's great to imagine and see the things that you actually want to happen, pan out. You had a great swim, your transition is clean, the bike, you're strong, you're powerful, you're repeating these mantras in your mind, and then you're seeing yourself cross it, like a PR or a goal time that you might have. But the reality is tell me a time that you've ever had a 100% perfect race.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know. I think I had an, you know what? No, I was going to say I had one almost perfect, but it wasn't perfect because I got stuck in my swim skin.
Yeah.
So
you can even look at the pros, and the pros will tell you, there's no perfect day. There's always something that goes wrong.
Yeah.
There's always, a water bottle of nutrition popping off the back because you went over rumble strips on the road, and there goes 400 calories, and that you're out, and you have to make it up with a Cliff Bar at the aid station, or like yourself, there's a swim skin issue and you can't get it off, and you're delayed, a couple of minutes, or maybe you get a flat on the bike. Right? Or maybe you cramp on the run, or you have to go use the bathroom. Whatever the case may be, there's never really a perfect race. So it's great to visualize and imagine those things. But I also have my athletes imagine the what ifs. So I want you to imagine that you're on the bike and you're doing a half Ironman, and you're about mile 50 and you get a flat. I want you to imagine what that's like. I want you to imagine the feelings that come with it, the stress. And I want you to find a word or a mantra that helps you calm down and see yourself fix the flat in a calm, cool, collected manner. So that way, if it does happen, right, the what if it does happen, you're like, oh, yeah, I've seen this before. I can do this. And then it just brings more awareness to those things. And in sports psychology, we call that mental contrasting, which basically means you're seeing the obstacles in your mind before they happen. So that way, if they do actually happen, you sort of have a game plan, so to say, and a way to handle those things emotionally.
Yeah, that's a great point, because just a personal example of mine, I was doing a half Ironman. I did not get a flat, but it was a looped course, and you went around one portion of this loop. You hit it at least like 2 or 3 times, I believe. And this spot there was a pothole, and I hit the pothole and I lost an entire bottle of nutrition. And so each time I would come back past, instead of just focusing on the rest of my race and knowing that I could make it up, the nutrition, I could make it up somewhere else, I would actually slow down and look to see if I could see the bottle on the side of the road. And I became like, I got myself so worked up about this lost bottle that, I mean, it didn't cost me much. Like, I still ended up having a great time, but guess what? I made up the nutrition on the run. Like, there's no shortage of nutrition on a half Ironman course, and somewhere where you're going to need that, And what I did was I actually had a secondary, I used powder nutrition. So I had a plastic bag tied up with nutrition so I had double nutrition for the run. So in reality, I was fine, but I became so fixated on it. So I think what you were just saying, had I visualized that happening, I would have, been better off. It would have been like, okay, I lost that bottle. I saw that happening. It's okay. I have double nutrition still in transition for the run. Plus there's Cliff Bars and everything else. Like, it's all going to be fine.
Yep, and that's a classic example of something that I mentioned earlier, the things outside of your control. You dwelled on the past of losing your bottle, and then you started fixating on, okay, well, maybe I can find my bottle and get off my bike real quick and recover it,
100%,
But in reality, you gotta move on from it and kind of hit that mental reset button. And with my athletes, I tell them to hit the lap button on the Garmin. Like, if you're distracted, there's a physical button right in front of you that you can just wipe everything clean and restart. And that's on the Garmin or on whatever piece of computer that you have. And that can be a mental reset in those times where you get distracted or you're not focused, to focus back on the things that you have control over.
And I mean, just to like tie it all together, like, you did that same exact thing. Like, you did that thing with your entire career. Like, you had this goal and you came to the realization that that's not what you wanted to do, and you hit that reset button, you hit that lap button, and completely made a transition into what you are doing right now and helping athletes, which is very, very different from what you originally thought you wanted to do. Right.
Yeah, and definitely, and hence the name of my company, Transition Performance, tying in triathlon and my own transition in life. That's kind of where that name stems from. But you're exactly right, and that goes back again to the students that I teach and the athletes that I teach about kind of finding your why and your purpose, and telling them, even if you don't have a reason of why you do what you do right now, it'll come sooner or later, because I'm a prime example of going through these different experiences through my life and not really having clarity. But then it was almost like the sports psychology came to me just based off of everything that was happening in my life. And once there was like, I can't even recall the moment that it happened, but it was just this slow process of me just really figuring out, like, hey, sports psychology and mental performance, I can help athletes go through the things that I went through and help them get better every single day. And in triathlon, you're average at 3 sports, so we always have room to improve in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Seth, do me a favor, and I know you mentioned the name of your company, but if anybody wants to reach out and talk to you, about some of the services and some of the things that you offer, or just reach out and, let you know what they thought about this episode, whatever the case may be, where can they find you? Where can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my website is transitionperformance.org. That's my website. You can go on there, and it has a lot of my contact information and my services I provide. My email, if you guys want to email me, is transitionyourperformance@gmail.com. Feel free to reach out and send me an email with any questions that you have. And then also, too, I just recently released a new book called Pave the Way: Principles to Mastering the Mind. So if you're hesitant on getting mental performance consulting or hiring a sports psychology professional because maybe you don't feel like you have time or the funds to do so, this is a great cheap way for you to get an introduction to mental conditioning, and then it's pretty interactive and hands-on, so that way you can add it to your next training block for your next race that you might have.
Right on. Well, Seth, I just wanted to take a minute here at the end as we're wrapping things up just to say thank you so much for coming on, and also for sharing your story with all of us on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I know that the listeners are going to appreciate it as well. And I appreciate how open and honest you were, especially when it came to your hard times, of trying to just get up the steps, and something that sounds so simple. And, now looking back, you can laugh at it, but I'm sure at the time it really felt like your world was kind of crashing in. So thank you so much for coming on, like I said, and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks for having me on. And Justin, if you're listening, thanks for connecting me and Ian. It was a great time. Thank you for letting me explain my story. I know everybody has their own story, but I would say each story is unique in their own way, and you never know where life's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great spot to end it off, man. So thank you so much, and
Cool.
we will keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ian.
How did that one hit you guys? I think that it was a very eye-opening, and it was a very just open in general conversation that I got to have with Seth, and I am extremely, extremely grateful for how open Seth was when it came to talking about those rough patches in his life. And I expressed my gratitude to him after the podcast was recorded. And I would just like to take a minute to express gratitude to him again right now, because I know that it is difficult to be open about such tough times, and I really appreciate him opening up like that, because I know for a fact that the listeners are going to enjoy that very much so, and there is probably, almost, I want to say without a doubt, going to be someone who can relate to that story. So I think that that was very, very powerful, and I just want to say thank you again to Seth for being so open and for coming on the podcast. I want to say thank you to you, the listener, for coming and hanging out with Seth and I this week on the podcast. We really appreciate you giving us your ears and hanging out for about an hour and a half, to an hour, and just really listening to this story, listening to this interview. I know Seth appreciates it, and I appreciate it as well, so thank you. And if you want to support some of the work that I am up to here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, there's a few ways to do that. Please feel free to share this with your friends, post it on Facebook, post it on your Instagram story, and tag me doing it for yourself on Instagram. I would really, really appreciate that, and I would love to interact with some of you guys who are listening. And last but not least, if you could please leave a review. I really enjoy reading these reviews, so if you could take a minute to just do that, that would greatly, greatly help the show. So thank you guys so much again for hanging out. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to bringing you a very, very fantastic and spectacularly exciting guest in next week's episode.